So, part two of Totally Classics, asking the question, are progressives the worst? And today, I promise we'll get into comparison groups and maybe even clarify even more what we mean by the worst. Because, there are we got to have some competitors on the field. We got to be looking for who gets the silver medal, who gets the bronze medal. My name is Brendan McNamara.
And my name is Andy Swindler.
And this is Totally Classic, where every time we get together, we explore different topics with curiosity, especially topics that people say are too divisive to even talk about. And you shouldn't even platform anyone who disagrees with you. Let's not live in that world. Let's live in a world of curiosity and exploration. Let's let everything be a call to adventure. We wanted to start this week by doing almost a little bit of a backtrack because a central part of the way I've been examining in order to put this thesis forward that progressives are the worst, and by that I mean uh, like the most openly evil cohort in American politics. And I would actually suggest they are arguably they could contend for like the most evil structurally cohort in human history. Um, yes, beyond even the Mongols and Stalin, Hitler, et cetera, that sort of thing. And people might be like, "Oh my gosh, that's exaggerative." It's not remotely exaggerative. We can go set forward and prove it. But one of the premises, Andy and I were just talking offline, was one we wanted to clarify, especially for anybody who might identify as a progressive. I don't think any progressive should be offended by me calling you evil. I hear progressives calling MAGA evil on a daily basis, and it doesn't seem to bother the MAGA people. So let's go ahead and not be offended by something as silly as that, as someone else calling you mean or evil. We just go, hmm. All you have to do in that is become curious when someone says something like that to you. You go, huh, am I evil? Let me examine it. What is evil? But one of the premises has to do with acknowledging that, and Andy and I did this in a previous episode, but we should do it kind of again here. We went through, it's the one, I think it was the first big one that we agreed on, Andy, which was, is woke a religion? And I think woke has now become a term that has been run so hard into the ground, it's very even hard to ascertain what it means. Like I'm woke by the original meaning, the old school, like 70s, 80s, 90s meaning. I'm not woke at all by the like 2000s, 2020 version. And I was like, in some ways, I think let's stop using woke because the new Cracker Barrel rebrand supposedly is woke when all it is just ugly and modern.
I
I don't
saw
understand.
that.
Yeah, I was like, that is okay. We're both sides who use it, the people who hate it and people who love it, have run the term into the ground where it's really struggling to have any functional meaning anymore.
This
So
this is where my tendency to just read the headlines is really valuable. Because like I got an email from LinkedIn that's like, oh,
yeah,
we've seen enough headlines about this that it's worth sending you an email. And I'm like,
yeah,
really? Did
is
we need to
there?
all be talking about this? I
Did
mean,
we?
I'm kind of in the middle as usual because
Yeah.
I'm like, keep the barrel. I mean, the barrel was great.
Yeah, the barrel and Uncle Herschel. I mean, my favorite thing there was Uncle Herschel's combo, and so Uncle Herschel, I guess, is the guy leaning on the barrel. So, but he just went the way of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and the I don't know the Sacagawea figure on the butter container. So, but we both kind of agree that woke was a religion, and I've sort of transmuted that over into progressivism because progressivism does rely on a series of metaphysical claims. But Andy was like, "Yeah, but I think a progressive would hear that and be like, I don't even know what you're talking about." So, would you walk me through that a little bit more, Andy? Like, how do you think? Because you know way more, I know a number of progressive people. Most of my like social friend group for the past 20 something years are all at least culturally progressive. Um, but I think you're much more involved with like actual progressive activism and that sort of layer. So I think you're in like a deeper circle than I am. I'm more into like everyone's casually progressive.
Right. So the question is, yeah, as I suggested, that if it's important to frame this conversation in the context of your thesis around progressivism, progressivism being a religion. You just said woke is a religion. Are you also saying progressivism is a religion?
Modern progressivism, meaning like as operating probably since 2014 or 15, is functionally religious in a whole bunch of ways, but most especially in their frequency of making moral claims from a moral relativist position, which doesn't make any logical sense. So it's a miraculous and or metaphysical claim. And then they enforce their metaphysical claims through law, like any law, like we were just reading the USA Today piece where someone has been prosecuted and they're on trial now for not using someone's preferred or chosen or pronouns that the person wanted them to use. But that's a metaphysical claim because gender identity is a subjective claim that cannot be confirmed empirically. Because it can be rejected empirically if we use the definitions of the words involved, but based on that, it's something like God told me to do something, where it can't be falsified. You can't falsify that God told me to do something because I what do you mean? It's in the realm of the ineffable. And so progressives have a number of policies that are based on you have to agree with our metaphysical claim. Abortion is one, gender affirmation is another, gender identity affirmation is another. And those are invisible, metaphysical, ineffable, those are religious level claims. So in that way, they
Yeah.
function as a religion in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, and in that exact example, I've talked at some length that I'm a little more likely to adopt or at least accept the metaphysical claim. But the follow-on part about the law and the
Yeah,
compelled speech and somebody losing their job, that's where I think we tend to be more aligned,
yeah,
where yeah, that's not helpful, particularly in that exact case, because the woman who was fired was quoted as saying, "I'm happy to use their name." And I think
yeah,
you've even arrived at that as like a potential solve. Like, well, just
yeah,
don't use the pronoun, just call them by their name.
yeah. But again, even that though is compelled. That's a compromise that doesn't need to be made, meaning it's compelled speech
Mm,
also, where you're like, you have to, I'm this other thing, but I want to be this now. You have to call me it.
right.
Where that, and
Because
that's my,
pronouns are part of a casual speech.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
You're
it's
having to
very,
edit
yeah.
your speech. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a political it's the closest corollary I can find in history, and I've researched this and I've asked AI to help me, is similar to the divine right of kings, where kings could decree how they were referred to as. They could even change units of measurement. That you know what I mean? They were basically given supreme right over dictating other people's reality. Emperors had this power. Stalin and Mao, like in socialist communist countries, you can kind of manipulate this as well. Throughout the People's Revolution in China, children could be taken away from their parents if their parents like said the wrong words or spoke the wrong ideology, which we have happening in the United States, right? Colorado tried to enshrine in law that if a parent didn't affirm their child's gender identity, they could have custody removed. So it's a political religious thing. It's the closest equivalent we have to like Christian nationalism, or I would even say white supremacist Christian nationalism on the right. So it's ethnocentric, religious. Progressivism is basically that on the left, and that to me is non-controversial. But I think to a progressive person, you were saying they would bristle at that and not see it. I don't understand how you can't see it because you're making as soon as you're saying like it's wrong to not call someone by the pronoun they want you to, you're making a moral claim because you said wrong. Right and wrong are moral categories. Moral categories are substantially insubstantial. They are metaphysical level. They're not saying it's unethical, which is how we organize or appraise or evaluate or apply morals. They're making it right and wrong. So it's already very much standing in the religious realm. Then, when it's something that can't be falsified, meaning my gender identity is this, which violates what gender means to English speakers, so it violates what language means. Identity, it violates what identity means, because identity has very little to do with self identification. Identity is that which can be validated. So if you said, like, my identity is an NBA player, that doesn't matter. Like, oh, well, no, it isn't. You're incorrect about your identity. I'm not an NBA player because it can be proven that I'm not. But since they've removed it from the category of that which can be proven or disproven, it's completely religious. It's completely metaphysical. And so I think that's why I'm like, I don't understand how any progressive could have a problem with it, but I totally believe you that people would.
Yeah, and maybe even a distinction you said a second ago, which is there's the idea of a religion.
Yeah.
With that immediately conjures Christianity, uh,
Islam or
Judaism.
whatever. Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Buddhism,
the
Hinduism.
big
Yeah,
ones, and then of
yeah.
course, I don't even know how many, sub religions.
Hundred. I think they think hundreds, like anywhere from 3 to 600, because there's lots of animistic ones that were very, very small, but yeah,
Well, and even I think I
hundreds.
heard there were 1,600 denominations of Christianity or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Obviously there's a lot of variety. but those are the categories that I think of with religion. Probably most people do. It's a good question because it's like, well, what is it to be a progressive? What is progressivism? Where does like what
Yeah,
category does it even belong in? Is a pretty fascinating question.
it's very
I
difficult to figure
thought of
out.
it as more political in at
Yeah,
some point, having grown up in like a card carrying, Democrat blue household in the
yeah,
like mostly the 80s and 90s.
yeah,
At some point, I just liked the word better. It was like when I just think about the word itself, it's like
yeah. Progress. Yeah,
cool. We're getting better is
yeah,
what
yeah, yeah,
hope it means at the most sort of just basic, level of vocabulary. And then we've talked quite a bit about how I sort of kept going down that journey and ended up on the far left.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so to me, it's social, political, but if anything, a lot of the folks in those movements, I think, have rejected formal organized religion in the way that we think about it in many of the ones we've named. Um,
yes,
so that's where I think the disconnect would come from.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I guess how would people or how do people in the movement like how do they make any right or wrong assertion? Because that's a moral claim, which really almost exclusively is in the arena of the religious. You know what I mean? Like Confucianism is ancient, but it's considered an ethical system, not a religious system. So it really doesn't have to do with what has buildings or legal recognition or nonprofits or whatever like that. It's we're talking about ethics versus morals. And as far as I can tell, progressivism is a morally relativist cohort, meaning universal principles do not exist. And this is why it's different. This is why I think progressivism is actually antithetical to 80s and 90s Democratness, because 80s and 90s Democratness was liberal. Since critical theory is so fundamental to modern progressivism, it's like the academic underpinnings where we can find out, instead of just saying these spurious things, progressives are like this, you can literally go to the source material that informs the entire worldview, and it's published extensively. And critical theory is a huge part of that. And critical race theory specifically is antagonistic to li Enlightenment liberalism, Enlightenment rationality, objectivity, the rule, like the rule of law said it specifically. It's not like an inference. It is a self-defined statement. So it's nothing like that. You know what I mean? It's an antagonistic to that. And it doesn't believe progressivism doesn't believe in plurality of view, right? It's the most openly antagonistic to any disregard or disagreement of any political cohort on the spectrum. I mean, even in progressivism, you guys wrestle with that a lot.
it's that's true, and I especially that is part of what ejected me from some of the some branches of uh,
Yeah.
that movement. I think it relates to something you said when we were talking before the show, which I relate to at least an aspirational identity, which is people
Yeah.
really want to perceive themselves as kind and good people.
Yeah.
I think that's a tenet of a lot of religious activity, right? Which is
Yeah. Yeah.
here's a like you said, like a code of conduct or code of morality, and here's what to do when I inevitably fall short of that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's one of the basis by which progressivism to me is the worst, because they take a term like kindness and then change the definition of it and then accuse people of not being kind according to their new definition. Because I would say progressivism generally, again, there's exceptions in all groups. I'm just speaking generally. This is the same way I can speak about Christianity has aided and abetted slavery throughout history. Yep, true. It's also the force that conquered it. Those are both true. So, yes, things can happen. However, kindness has never been defined as affirmation, where I feel like affirmation is a fundamental element that has been added by progressives. And I actually, in some ways, I think it's like the central tenet tenet that progressives hold kindness to be. But that's not how any other ethical system or moral system has ever defined kindness. So in some ways, it's the most, according to what kind means, it is the most unkind sort of system, perhaps, I mean, arguably ever devised, because it's based on utilitarianism and moral relativism, which then allows selective kindness, meaning like you have to be kind to these people. Or in the case of a gender identity thing, right? You have to be kind to 1% of people, which means by virtue of your kindness, you're going to be being unkind to 99% of people. So it's not about collective kindness. So it's not actually, it pretends to be a collectivist system, but it's not because it's not universal. So that's let me try it this way. So Andy, we looked at this. These are I looked at simpatico things across ethical traditions: truthfulness, clarity, neutrality, non-malfeasance, empathetic, integrity, inclusivity, consistency, and transparency. And I think I sent those to you at one point. I was like, do you believe in these as ethical principles? Because I do, and I think these are fundamental to all the consensus of ethical systems across, and kindness. You can include kindness on there as well. I think those are in all systems across time. Like, does that sound like, I mean, I could say it again, obviously, because it's hard to just list a whole bunch of things and you have to agree to it. But do you believe in all those as like, those are good ethical principles?
Yeah, you
But
had texted this before.
yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
can't, fight back against any of those as ethical principles.
yeah.
So we
And
can.
would you note, especially in all the conversations we've had, that progressives openly and intentionally violate every single one of them? Or is there any one you think they don't violate? Because they violate truthfulness in their semantic disruption. There are over 83 words that progressives just say mean a new thing. And then honestly, the gender identity claim is contrary to truthfulness because it says that truth doesn't actually exist. Only the only thing that exists is what anyone claims to be true. Clarity, again, in their semantic rearrangement, that absolutely throws clarity out the window. They like demand you use their new definition of gender even though 60% of people completely disagree with it, and actually probably functionally close to 80 something people disagree with it. Neutrality, absolutely not the case. They specifically believe in favoring certain groups over others. Non-malfeasance, they very specifically punish and want laws to punish those who disagree with their premises. And by openly supporting abortion, that is a malfe it may be, you can look for like a net benefit or net positive utilitarian view of non-malfeasance, but malfeasance is to intend any harm to anyone else. And abortion represents the greatest harm set against human beings in human history. More people have been killed by abortion in 50 years than all other causes throughout all human history. That's wars, plagues, murders, genocides, literally all of them. Empathetic, they are selectively empathetic, meaning they empathize with certain groups, and then other groups they specifically are not empathetic with. Like in their case, any oppressor, they sort of eschew empathy and feel like, and even say out loud that empathy with the oppressor is a manipulation. Integrity, they change universal values on a per person basis. They don't believe in universal values. They actually just believe in values for specific groups that they've identified. Inclusivity, no. They only believe in inclusivity for specific groups, specifically excluding the majority of people most of the time. Consistency, we've already addressed that. And transparency, absolutely not. Because again, as we've talked about, no one's talking about these things. People are just saying these new things are true, and then they're just saying, like, get with it, or you're losing your job. Like, get with it, or you're a bad person, or you're phobic, or you're hateful. And people are not remotely transparent about what's transpiring in terms of from what basis they're making right and wrong claims about that sort of thing. So very clearly, and this isn't just people violating these things, because I think if you were to say, well, Christians, I can tell you, I can absolutely right now, I could run down and give you an example of a Christian, individual Christians violating all of these. However, the primary difference here is we're talking about a programmed, cohort-wide, academically supported, you could pull dozens of citations for each of these, where people are openly practicing these things, all these violations of ethics, like out loud. And you've sent me tons of the materials that showed me, like that you have from your groups, that literally make these things plain. So then it's actually a systemic pan-ethical violation as opposed to individuals simply like doing the wrong thing, which always happens. And that's where we need, of course, massive grace and mercy because we're hypocrites as well. But if we program hypocrisy, I think it's an entirely, it's, it is, I don't know how you don't say, I don't know how we can examine it and say it's not the most like openly unethical by any classical definition system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. Yeah, again, I guess I'm trying to look through the lens, not necessarily to defend progressivism, but to think about how progressives perceive themselves. And
Yep.
I think they tend to perceive that they're quite clear and they're quite consistent. Um, and that the transparency is there, as you said, like it's incredibly well documented, like where these ideas come from with critical theory, et cetera. But they're not necessarily always putting that out there. You're a hardcore researcher, so you find it, you follow all the breadcrumb trails.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But this is the thing. Every group claims to be truthful.
right.
Nazis claim to be truthful. Stalin's regime claimed to be truthful. For progressives listening, MAGA claims to be truthful. Transparent. I mean, in some ways, MAGA, this like Trump administration has been the most transparent administration I've ever seen in my life. And even then, I still don't know what all they're up to, and I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. So they're certainly not, but they prioritize all these things and think of themselves as these things. So again, this is one of the major issues of the progressive thing, right? Because if it's all subjective based, then we just have to go, well, who does someone think they are? But progressives universally condemn people who think they're all these things, and then they reveal themselves to not be those things, which means we have to use the same metric that progressives use for others upon progressives themselves. And that's where progressives tend to reveal very quickly that they don't allow it. They don't allow so really in some ways progressivism has very little it's almost all progress. It's like the thing is the idea is all progress, even though I actually think it's wildly regressive. It's ethnos, it's racially supremacist, it's returning to divine right of kings, it's totalitarian, it's seeking to undermine semantics. I mean, old, this is old stuff, man.
Well, the
So
ones I do agree with
yeah,
more on a personal experience basis, and
yeah,
I would think more at large is the lack of empathy, the
yeah,
lack of integrity, and I've mentioned a couple of cases like
yeah.
that
You've had very specific examples of that. Yeah,
where you if somebody states, in the first part of this episode, we talked about a woman who on LinkedIn had suggested that this was a very sort of safe or brave container for
yeah.
conversation, and then accused me of being anti-Semitic. Uh,
So safe.
yeah, uh, and the inclusivity, which I suppose is the most. I do try to use this word sparingly, but ironic, given that progressivism is often joined at the hip with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
But they violate those pretty openly. But again, I think I have for a long time I was just like they're just hypocrites, and I think from any classical sense that's a very defensible, maybe even a more logical, rational, true position than my position. My understanding now, having dug as deep as I can, and AI has been super helpful because AI has a programmed progressive bias that it openly admits and says is bad, but it can't really do anything about it. So just because it would be bad to have any bias in any sort of like strongly religious direction that doesn't really have any underpinnings that we can even address it by. And it's progressivism is explicitly antagonistic to the ways and means we've gained progress throughout human history. Oh, wait, is that sentence clear? I've been using that a lot lately. Progressivism is antagonistic to like rationality, liberalism, objectivity, and rationalism, objectivity, and universal values, which progressivism doesn't believe in. It's a relativist system. Those have universal values and rationale appeal has been the turnkey by which slavery was overturned, obviously plus violence. Women's rights have been gained. It's set like every progress we've made as a society has been via an appeal to universal rights and values, right? All people being created equal, bodily autonomy as like a universal concept instead of a selective concept like progressivism applies it, that sort of thing. So in that way, I was like, this is all, and I think this is for kids who are like 20 years old and just grew up in this and they think this is the only thing that ever happened. I mean, in some ways, AI will be great for this because it can survey all of human history in 25 seconds. But unless you ask it, it's not going to. It's just going to tell you the same thing that you already know. And the fact that so progressives are oppressors straight up by their own internal sort of intersectional system, right? Because they hold disproportionate institutional power and now with AI, that's approaching the level of universal institutional power. They control the law more than any other religion does. They control media in terms of like their POV is overrepresented, and it's overrepresented in academia, except for like the sort of hard sciences, right? Like I think like astrophysics or engineering or high mathematics, that sort of thing. Um, and so we have a thing that the thing I don't understand is like how if they openly and intentionally violate all these things, we even starting with truthfulness, right? Because progressives had changed the definition of truth. Whereas truthfulness as an ethical principle means that which is in accordance to reality. Meaning, when someone says a black man is not a human being or not a person, and they're not legally recognized as a person, right? As they used to be in this country, which is heinous. But it's heinous because it's not true. It was not truthful. A black man, a black woman is a person, just like an unborn person is a person. They are a human being individual. It's undeniably so. And if our whole premise in this country is all are created equal, of course, all men, oh, no, no, but men back then meant all humans, all of mankind, the species. And creation happens, we all know scientifically, happens from conception. That's how we argued for it, and that's how eventually it was became a convincing case. So by something that can be shown, but if it becomes a category of that which is asserted, then basically we're defaulting to, let's say, a slavery era system when whatever the power group in power asserts is truth is now truth. So it's not progressive at all. It's actually kind of regressive in that sense. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And would a progressive just say, well, that's not true? Or would they, like, that's the thing I don't know. It's hard to, other than AI, it's hard to get anyone to address, like, let's say that as like the most fundamental way.
Oh
And
yeah, most
yeah,
progressives would say they're following all those ethical principles that it's yeah, all people are equal. That's what
but
we're fighting for. And I'm not we don't need to get into that. One of the things that's coming up for
yeah,
me is I don't know how much this matters, but I'm curious, like the
yeah,
difference between religion and cult. I had a mentor once say years ago, the way to tell if you're in a cult is try to leave and see how they treat you.
yes,
And so, again, going back to a principle that I hold and has helped us frame some things, dignity and agency, right?
yes,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
at least take away your agency by either
yes,
not allowing you to leave if we have that power, or like just making your life awful if you
yeah,
um, in a variety of ways. And I'm reminded of I was involved with a super left group in Chicago a few years ago, and
yeah,
re referred to the vaccine segregation,
yeah, yeah,
and so I'm reminded of that because you just referred to this as like a slavery era system, and that would
yeah,
just everybody's head would explode if you were talking about your progressives.
yeah,
That's what happened, and they attempted to sort of call me. This is one where things get weaponized because it's like really one guy was calling me out, but there's
yeah,
and some of this just actually boils down to the level of skill, right? Because it'll
sure,
be like,
yeah,
oh, we're going to call you in. You've
yes,
clearly violated the principles of this group
yes, yeah,
slash religion slash cult.
yeah,
That's just accepted. and now here I
Yeah.
am, one person, and I'm gonna kind of see how much support I get and everything
Yeah.
else. So there was like a big pile-on about that we shouldn't even use that term, segregation. Like that term
Yeah.
is reserved uh, in a sacred way, you might say. Well, not you wouldn't say because we talked about the definition of sacred, but it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the way that it's more commonly overused now. Like it's reserved because that when we say segregation, that invokes, you know, the segregation of African Americans and in all the heinous aspects of that. And
Yeah. Intentionally. I mean, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same system. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and like functionally, right.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's, I guess what I'm getting at is like that's an interesting example of like a almost like a the mythology of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, if I was talking to a Christian and I started bashing Matthew or something, or
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
or one of his stories, or one of
Yeah.
his fables or one of the books in the Bible, it's like I don't know though. It's interesting even as I say that because I've had friends who are in seminary just to look at Christianity for a minute, and
Sure.
maybe Methodism is a little different, but I remember that friend in seminary actually saying, talking about faith and saying, we should be questioning our faith.
Yeah.
We this is like a framework to question, how we live together.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what was missing for me in that moment, because it
Yes.
wasn't like there wasn't an open discussion about,
Yeah.
and I didn't trust the intention or the level of skill to be quote unquote called
Yes. To be adjudicated over. Yeah.
or to have a reasonable discussion about it. It was
Yeah.
clear that it was just like, no, you've misstepped. You've used the wrong word.
Yeah.
It's like playing operator, or no,
Yeah.
operation, that old game,
Operation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody's good at that game, seriously, but like I want to play with a surgeon
Just
one day, and see if a surgeon could actually play that game. They'll know
yes.
it's harder than surgery,
Yeah. It's way harder, dude.
but that's what it feels like,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
You've hit the edges. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
just like always waiting, like to be like,
Yeah.
you're walking a tightrope. It's like, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And in that way,
Yeah.
that's that's how I think of many religions, or in a more severe way, probably cults, right? Where there's
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
a really clearly, absolutely defined way of being here.
Yeah. And there is in a lot of religions as well. Again, I've grown up, I've got kicked out of two Christian schools, so I'm well aware of where you can run into violations with certain religious groups. That's the thing I think. So for me, it was very easy to recognize early on. I was like, oh, yeah, this is just a 10 times worse version of anything I've ever experienced in the conservative evangelical community, which I notice, at least amongst progressive Christianity is not Christianity, everybody. Just a different religion. It's an entirely different religion. The same way that rabbinic Judaism is not Mosaic Judaism. It's just a different. It changes six to seven things, even from a secular academic point of view as well as an internal point of view. It's just different now. So what's fascinating is that sector specifically is super antagonistic to evangelicalism and Christianity for being this way. So especially in my like very internal special cohort, which is preoccupied with Christians and progressives, um, I just immediately recognized I was, oh, you're just doing a multi times worse than the worst treatment I've ever heard about in this cohort that I've existed in, that I've been kicked out of, and I've been threatened by, and I have literally out loud. And I was like, this is worse. And that I think that how I recognize it was worse is because there's no basis for truthfulness in a Christian purview. The Bible, Scripture, ultimately uh, is your true it's your true north. So everyone can reference back to that, and ultimately, if you can kind of prove via the basis of truth, and then rationality or logos, reason is kind of just below that because reason is very engaged. Whatever. Judaism is a highly reasonable faith, and Christianity is just it's a different, it's a novel form of Judaism that began in the first century. it's an intellectual, reason-based um, faith. So ultimately, that's where the argument is rooted. And I've noticed with progressivism, there's no root. No one has a root. There's no commonality. So it turns into all groupthink. It's all um, essentially it's all like systemic oppression by a majority, like over and over and over again. And again, I've engaged largely online, so I fully recognize the bias of that. But I have attempted to have comprehensive conversations about these things with progressives hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of times, maybe 400 different people I've tried to engage. And I would say 3 or 4 out of those hundreds can engage without name calling, without castigation, or without absolute relativism, which renders any conversation incomprehensible because then all it is a battle of wills then at that point. Or it's an appeal, or it's a bandwagon fallacy. But again, because progressives reject logic, all the rules of logic don't apply. So it becomes, at least for me, as like a logical feeling, again, 98 in openness, guys. I'm wildly open, but there has to be some stability in openness, or else like don't be so open-minded your brain falls out kind of thing. And so that to me is like this is both lived experience and like demonstrable, provable, intentional effect to be the most cult-like operation ever. So that's why like progressives, like if they couldn't see as a religion, I don't completely understand it. Like how would you, just because there's no building or something? Like
Well, that's
it's
it. It's the
yeah,
lack. It's exactly what you just pointed to.
yeah,
The one thing, the one thing a progressive would probably agree on is that
yeah,
there's no Bible,
yeah,
and any one of us, and I will
yeah,
step back into the movement for a moment. It's like any
yeah,
one of us could point to, works of literature that I've gotten a lot from.
sure,
I don't know, Afrofuturists or whatever. Like there's amazing authors, that are telling stories that can teach us important things about morality.
yeah,
But there's at least dozens, which we would, if you were to like correlate 100 reading lists of the progressive movement, you'd
yeah,
find at least a few dozen, I think, in common. And really, there's hundreds. I mean,
yeah,
it's very widespread. And so I think
yeah,
that hopefully that's a point anybody would agree on because it's not a criticism, it's just a fact. It's just like
yeah.
there is no central Bible, there's no central thesis, there's no central.
And there's no basis for truth at all. I mean, there's no truth claim other than that which someone says it is, right? Because by rooting yourself, like again, I always go to misgendering because I think it's the most uh, phenomenally revealed phenomenon of that exhibits all of these, illustrates all of this religiousness and all of this ethical rejection in a single case because it relies on a concrete definition that's the least likely definition of gender, for example, and the least likely definition of the word identity. So but that is pretty universal. That if you said misgender to a progressive person, I would tell you 99 to 100% of progressives would know what that term meant, even though mis means incorrectly or wrongly, and gender has a stable meaning, which most tenably is cohort by biological sex. And then the second biggest definition is cohort by biological sex and the social expectations of said cohort. So then that reveals there are really strong, adamant truth claims that people get pissed at you if you even try to question or anything. But again, they're rooted in nothing. So they're rooted in nothing but what someone said. And not even the majority of people said, just some certain people who they've decreed are sacred. And so ultimately that's like it throws truth out, right? Because you can't, truth has to be like provable or unprovable, or else truth isn't a category. So that's what I've noticed is that I feel like 90, they might not say it out loud immediately, but if you push them on it, again, 90+% of progressives will be like, well, yeah, truth isn't, there's no such thing as truth as has been considered by all of humankind globally for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
So there might be two categories here. One is, I don't know, you're speaking to like a ideological truth, like a how do we define these terms? Like what's the foundational pillar, that we're using or methodology? And then I go to it's hard for me to accept that there's zero truth because I do know good, say, DEI practitioners who actually do good research and like would point to, I don't know, racial disparity in the 20th century, whatever. Like
Yep.
there's certainly good research out there that is, I would say, connected to the progressive movement. Uh,
Yes.
but that's not necessarily what you're talking about.
Well, I'm saying, yeah, no, that is what, as far as I can tell, it's dabbling in the object in the empirical, or let's progressivism leans on social science the most. So it's dabbling in the semi-empirical because social science really relies a lot on subjective report, which is why I think people think subjectivity is so truthful. But they don't believe in truth in any fundamental sense. Meaning, if for you not to violate the ethical principle truthfulness, you have to have a stable definition of what truth is, and it has to be universally applied as an ethic, right? Wouldn't you say? Like you can't just have truth be important over here when we're bringing up statistics, and then truth not be important over here when we're talking about what words mean or how one can falsify any statement.
Hmm.
Because then it means anything anybody says cannot be falsified if they fully believe it. Because if you that, again, this is why misgendering is like a tent pole. And again, I don't even understand why anyone jumped on this to believe in it. Because in some ways, this is like it's the Achilles heel, or it's the most obvious Achilles heel for the movement. Because then they're saying that gender, which is the division of human beings into dimorphic sexuality, which is how the species reproduces, which is a more fundamental truth. It can be more consistently and causally proven than any statistic about like economic outcomes, right? Or happiness or intergenerational wealth. I mean, that is so high above and harder to prove and pull out all the covariates and confounders of to make anything causal. So then they're basically saying you believe in less stable truth as solid, but then when you come to solid truth that we can actually prove one way or another, you're saying that's not real, which means you don't actually believe in truth as a concept. You only believe it in a concept for selective application, which is not, that's not,
Yeah.
again, that's not ethical by any, and you, again, you were raised in a philosophical household. That certainly isn't moral because moral is definitionally stable and ethics are the variable ways of applying stable principles. So it's not moral, certainly, and then it's not ethical as near as I can tell. So then it makes any use of like right or wrong or good or bad. It's already cultural appropriation. If it isn't religion, it's culturally appropriating religion. It's the white
Well,
chick with dreadlocks, you know?
well, a while back, I offered a definition of a social justice warrior. That's somebody with a
Yeah,
heart who is uh, avoiding or perhaps immune to complexity. Um,
yeah,
and
or even
that,
simplicity. Yeah,
well, in that way, yeah, there we could weave truth into that second part in some way. But I think the key thing is that first part.
yeah,
I'm not saying it absolves this or changes this,
no,
but I'm somebody who focuses a lot on intention, and I
yeah.
want to know that. Actually, it's funny. I'm reading this book, How Emotions Are Made, and it's a whole chapter about emotions in the law, and it's absolutely fascinating.
It is so
how,
wild.
how the perception of emotions affects jurors' decisions,
Oh,
the
it's
decision
huge. Yeah,
whether or not to send somebody to life in
yeah,
certain places, maybe even sent
yep,
like
yep,
death sentence, etc.
yeah,
In the most extreme examples. And her whole principle, which
yeah,
which you would love, it's like a deeply neuroscience based rewrite of like how emotions are even constructed in the first place.
yeah.
The fact that we can't there is no blueprint on the face or the vocal tone or whatever, and yet it's written into the law that
Yeah.
that intent,
Oh,
whether you
it's
demonstrate
huge.
remorse and the
Yep,
intent is a
yep,
major factor,
yeah,
and yet it's unprovable, right? So
yeah.
it's
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 it's funny.
metaphysical. Yeah.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but it seems very corollary to what
Oh,
you're.
it's super similar. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's like how do we derive intent? I don't know. We could just ask somebody.
Yeah, but but how do you deal with the problem that every movement in the history of the planet has stated their intention is positive?
Yeah.
All of them. So then the intent, if we accept self-declaration as accurate, it's all for the best of everyone. Like every ICE raid is for net benefit for all of us. Every, every abortion, every enslavement, every from a utilitarian ethics perspective, if I say that my intent of obliterating, killing every Palestinian to reduce Palestinian suffering and to cause more happiness than sadness. So utilitarian wise, that's all you need is create net benefit. Then my intention is clear. And therefore, like, how else can you reject intention than the evidence of whether that intention is accurate or not? You know what I mean? If someone's like, oh, I really meant to protect them, and you shot them 45 times in the face, you'd be like, I mean, it's cool that you say that. Or if someone says, like, I am like a man or a woman, that's even more fundamental than any intention to harm. And since it's already gone so fundamental, then you have to go, well, how do we address that? Like, if we
Well,
either have to assume a truthfulness of everybody or assume everybody's lying, or we have to have some stable means of saying who's telling the truth or not.
and it worked. This is one area where the movement once again works
Yeah.
against itself because
Yeah.
the DEI space, you talk a lot about intent and impact.
Yeah.
And I'd say early-ish, well, it's been around for decades, but like let's say
Yeah.
when I started getting into it, maybe 10 years ago, it
Yeah.
seemed like there was a much bigger emphasis on impact. And I think there still is.
Yes, I think so too.
At the end of the day, to your point, it's like,
Yeah.
well, depending on the scenario, it's like, hey, in some cases, impact is far more important than if some great harm was done. Most of us, I think, would agree that impact is far, far more important, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
Then, but then I don't know, in my own journey, and then I noticed others doing this too. It was like, well, we can't throw out intent entirely. So it started becoming like intent and impact. Like, let's actually
Yep.
measure both, which, like
Yeah.
I said, obviously is a tenet of the legal system. And what
Yeah.
it attempts to do is like measure those.
Yes.
So yeah, this over. I don't think the progressive movement would accept an overemphasis on intent in most circumstances.
Hmm. Yeah. But they do in very specific circumstances, like assume absolute purity of intent, such that if you disagree with the purity of intent of an individual, you should face social and legal censure. And I feel like, now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's only like 70 or 80% of progressives who support like laws against misgendering. But that speaks to, again, like a non universal application of principle, where it says, I just assume them. Then if this person says they're a woman, even if I can prove that they're not, and even if they call themselves a trans woman, which I'm a trans woman, 100%, because trans means across from trans woman. I'm across from a woman. I'm 100% a trans woman. That is, not only do I believe that, I can prove it. So, but again, this is just around this one category. We can do about 4 or 5 different ones, but this is just the most concrete one that we can prove out in the open. They then say some people's intention is unassailable and you must never question it. And if you question it, you're hateful and you should be punished for it. Would you say that most progressives, if not all, I mean, have you ever met a progressive who doesn't essentially at least believe in that? They might not think that you should go to prison, but they do think what you're doing is wrong and you should not ever question that person's intent.
Yeah, when it falls into certain accepted categories. And this is the part
Yeah.
where I do think there is actually some consistency within the progressive movement,
Yeah.
sort of what those categories are, what the right thing to say is, so to speak, etc. Uh, what's the right way to address somebody? So this brings us back to that USA Today article you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So she's getting fired because she, by stated religious reasons, didn't use somebody's preferred pronoun. Um, So how do we look at that through intent and impact? right? Or
The truthfulness is first, right? Clarity, neutrality, non-malfeasance, empathetic, integrity, inclusivity, consistency, and transparency is all contained in not using a pronoun that doesn't of, accord with reality, truth, like demonstrable, that which can be shown to be true or not.
well, I just put it through this lens for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Interesting. Like you were saying, when I think about intent, I think about did somebody intend to harm or not? And I that's what you're saying is often the way things are received. And so in that, and I don't exactly know how that correlates to the fact that that's actually becoming a legal matter.
Yeah.
And I assume that those are part of the legal discussion. It was like, is somebody, well, by in through your lens, like somebody adhering to biological truth, or let's just say more broadly, like adhering to their own preference of language or religion, um, is, to me, I actually don't read any intent to harm in there. Now,
I read intent to harm in the affirmation or the demand to affirm,
that
meaning,
but
yeah,
the woman
yeah.
who got fired,
Oh, got you.
I don't
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't read intent to harm there. I don't.
No,
It's
it's
hard
the
to imagine,
opposite.
and I'm
Yeah,
imagining this right from a
yeah.
fucking news article, but it's like
Yes, yeah, yeah.
really, it's like yeah, it's truly hard to imagine that somebody's just like, oh no, I hate that person, therefore I'm gonna refuse to address them the way they want to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, again, because this has never been demanded of a human being in our lifetime. No one has ever had this demanded of them. Have you ever had anyone prior to this world of quote unquote misgendering, which isn't misgendering, it's literally accurately gendering
Right.
according to what language means? And most ethical systems, if not actually all of them, utilitarianism is the only one that gives you a slight out. But let's say the universal truth is that saying anything that does not accord with reality is wrong speech. Or in Confucianism, it's actually the word is like translated wrong naming. So again, this is not just a Western concept. This is a global, universal. Every culture on the history of the planet. This has not ever been a demand that anyone has ever had to assent to. And people are already calling it a right, which is in USA Today. And I was like, that is insane.
A
That's
lawyer,
it's
a lawyer quoted.
Yeah, a lawyer said it was a right. And then they put it in the summary, even for people who don't want to read the article. The AI summary said it's between trans rights. I was like, what are you talking about? Nobody wants trans identifying people to have less rights. Tons of people want trans identified people to not have more rights than the average person.
So
Equal right. Yeah, everybody's into equal rights.
so that
Yeah.
takes us into impact, right? So
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain the argument for impact for the
Yeah.
trans coworker is lack of inclusion, lack of safety, lack of respect, lack I don't
Yeah.
know, we could name things in
Yeah.
that category. And the even if we accepted all that as true,
Sure.
I would argue that somebody losing their livelihood is a
Yeah.
far greater impact.
Sure. Well, and we can argue against all those things factually, meaning to say something untrue to a person is unkind, unempathetic, and it is a harm exercise. It is harmful to be a sycophant. All the people sitting around Donald Trump when he goes, and I listen, Donald Trump has a firm, consistent belief that everything he comes up with is probably the best. When he has people around him affirming that every idea he has is the best, that sucks. That is harm. They are harming him, they are harming others. So affirming someone's false identity claim to be the best is harmful, clearly harmful. And because I would even actually say it's the demand to affirm is evil, I would actually even say affirmation could like the strongest case is that it's a harmful thing to do because this is how whatever I with ChatGPT defined evil or it defined evil. I was like, what's the universal three? Inversion of truth, denying of universality or justice, and corruption of conscience. So demanding that someone affirm something that they know and can prove is not true is, if evil exists, then isn't that evil? So then that's where it's even fascinating. Like, so then aren't we even in the realm of evil at that point? Because harm can't be that person intended to harm me or I feel harmed. You have to go, oh, okay, well, what is the case? How do you know that they intended to harm you? And how would that tentatively be seen as harm? Someone speaking against my firm sense of myself, how would that ever be harmful? Like, let's look at it for me. Like, can you think of anything for yourself or for myself where that you just really believe about yourself, like firmly? Like, I know I'm that you could ever say someone denying it or not affirming it out loud would be harmful to you.
I, it, I could say it would hurt my feelings, which is interesting because in this book,
Yep.
Lisa Feldman Barrett, when she's talking about the law, she actually designates two clear forms of harm. One is
Yeah.
physical harm, which, I mean, you
Yeah.
left
Violent.
the scientist, she says tissue damage,
Yes. Yeah.
empirical evidence of physical harm,
Yeah.
and then emotional harm. This is
Can't you prove emotional harm too, though? I mean, if the damage is tissue.
if emotional harm damages tissue.
Yeah. If the body keeps the score, then emotional harm causes tissue damage. And then
I
that
mean,
we
I think
you,
that's true.
you should be able to prove it.
Can you measure it or prove it?
You should be able to. Yeah. Well,
I
and
mean, maybe an MRI. An
yeah,
MRI might be good up. I don't know.
is emotional distress harm though?
That's why I'm mentioning that because you
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
scientists saying, oh, they're like clearly just these two categories of
yeah,
harm.
yeah. But
Um,
I think they're wrong. I mean, I'd say they're wrong, like, and they're provably, demonstrably wrong because psychological distress is not explicitly harm. You know what I mean? Like, or you could, it can be, for example, build, how do you build muscle? You damage tissue. So then, therefore, we have to consider all exercise, physical fitness as harm. And you know what? I also don't flipping like it. I I am in an unpleasant mood when I have to go work out when I don't want to. And so it actually fulfills both definitions. So we cannot say that those are shoddy principles for determining what harm is. You can't like you literally can't do that. It's not a it's you can think of a way that it's wrong in 14 seconds. You know what I'm saying? So then isn't that fascinating? So then how do we at what point did having to affirm someone's sense of self become harmful? That doesn't just because you don't like something doesn't make something. I mean, I teach my kids this all the time. Just because you don't like something or you hate it or it makes you sad or it makes you afraid, that doesn't make it, it's not harming you. It's actually benefiting you, which is the opposite of harm.
well, what's interesting, I like that you compared it to physical exercise because this came up again recently, and I'd heard this before that it takes about 60 to 90 seconds to process like the average emotion,
Oh, yeah,
some
that's cool.
huge event or something in your life. But
Sure.
um, and so I mean, my mission, my like life's work is that we have more space to process.
Yeah, yeah,
That's like giving the body a chance. If you work out once a day and you don't overdo it, then that's right. The body gets stronger because it has a chance to heal. So
yeah,
it's there is a really interesting comparison there. So when does that psychological impact become harm, or when does it become trauma? In
yeah,
many cases, it's when we don't have the space to heal it or address it or to move through it or to grieve and all that.
yeah, yeah.
And that is to me, um, I have been in some, this is where it's hard to generalize too much because I've been in
Sure, sure.
some social justice, some progressive spaces that are true healing spaces, and they're all about holding space and like having space to process and
Yeah,
hopefully even at the better end, like fully inclusive of ideas that even like grate against the progressive,
yeah.
ideology. Um, but in other cases, there is no space,
Yeah, yeah.
process.
Well, yeah. Well, and for me, this is, I feel like sometimes my use in the world, debriding for healing wounds is very important, especially anything that's a bite. Like if you ever get bit by a shark, when you go, they're going to scrub the crap out of that with
Mm.
hard bristles. Same thing with burns. You've got to rip up the tissue.
Oof.
rip it to bits until so it doesn't, because if you heal a wound cheaply or you allow just like, well, let me just leave it alone, let me just give it space, you're going to lose a leg. So it's fascinating that the space is absolutely important. I think that's a great, like, having space to rest, to like breathe through it, to contemplate, to blah blah blah, absolutely necessary. The other absolutely necessary part is challenge. You have to be challenged. You have to receive challenge. You need you need challenge just as much as you need rest. So if you have a space that just like holds space and doesn't challenge and doesn't tear at things or investigate, then you're not really healing. You're basically just like chilling out. Listen, I'm suffering for myself. I have like a neck injury. I've chilled. I haven't exercised for like 2 months. It's driving me. It's I don't even like exercising, but it's starting to drive my body a little crazy. However, I also need to do like rehab exercises, which hurt. They're annoying to do. I don't like them. I don't want to do them. While I'm doing them, I don't like them, and they leave me sore. But if I don't do both, I'm not healing. Like
Yeah.
I have to, you have to do both. And what progressivism has done, and I think this is based on, what is it? Care ethics, I believe, is the system, which I think is it's one of the most ridiculous ethical systems I've ever heard of. It basically treats everybody like an infant. It sort of takes the way the mother takes care of an infant and applies it to all people. So that way, if anyone is in any pain or is anyone in sense, it's the smothering mother sort of thing as an ethical system. So I think that's kind of what's going on with where it's saying basically like trans people are infants. They're 6 month olds, and you can't push them. Like you can't you just whatever they need, you give it to them because so it's really infantilizing. It's super paternalistic. Um, but it may stem from that same thing where it's just like they just need space, except they need space forever. And they need space so much that you're not even allowed to challenge them, except especially in the workplace or even with children who are identifying as anything, then they're old enough to be challenged.
Well,
You're not a six
results,
month 6 month old anymore.
at least for me, is maybe especially true for me as somebody who's energetically sensitive. But it's like if
Yeah.
I don't have enough space, then I lose capacity. Like there's a
Yeah.
direct correlation there, and then it's like much harder to be challenged, right? I'm going to resist that.
Sure.
So there's yeah, I like how you're saying there's a balance. What did you call it? The hair system?
Which one? Oh, the ethical system?
Yeah.
Care. I believe it's called care ethics.
Okay, I think you said hair. I was like,
Hair ethics.
that have
Oh,
to do with anything.
tell me more. Was you cut your hair, it goes back stronger? How does this work? What are you talking about? Yeah, no,
It's the Samson thing. Come on,
Yes,
man.
it's the Samson thing. Yeah, but care ethics is another. I've been trying to identify all the underpinnings, like moral, utilitarian ethics and care ethics. For a while, I was like, oh, is progressivism more like Confucianism? But it violates Confucianism drastically because progressivism pretends to be a collectivist, or collective liberation movement, but it's not. It's very specifically it's a cohort. I like, again, concretely, a cohort specific liberation. It intends to liberate very particular people. But the weird thing, it tends to liberate them by making them weaker, which is, again, this is why I think it's evil. It's trying to make them weaker, therefore reliant on the collective.
Hmm.
Which means then, if trans people look at progressives as basically it's white saviorism. The progressives are their saviors, the only people caring about trans. Everybody else who wants to help trans people in a different way is anti-trans. They hate you. And listen, I've been listening to Mark Maron go on a billion shows. The comedian representing the progressive set. And he doesn't stop talking about trans people and how afraid they are and how under attack they are. All that's happening is unequal rights are being taken away. So you can't say that like trans rights aren't being taken away in total, but their unequal rights have been taken away. So no one's trying to take any way equals rights away. There's just we have a 14th Amendment, right, which all are equal under the law. We already have laws that violate that because it creates protective classes who have different burdens of proof required to adjudicate regarding them. So that's unequal. So we've already violated that principle in terms of our country. So our country, yes, is in need of progress. My goodness gracious. No one rejects that. But the fascinating thing is progressives then decide to highlight like a 1% group. And it says their statements about themselves or even about reality are unassailable. And that makes 90 something percent of everyone's statements about themselves and about reality assailable, which is, I mean, that's how the British went into India. So I was like,
I remember
that's fascinating to me.
we were doing at least one of our probably a handful of trans focused episodes a
Yeah.
while back, and I asked a friend who's really involved with a trans group here in Chicago
Yeah.
just for some research because I couldn't on that
Yeah.
particular group's website I couldn't find anything. I asked him
Yeah.
mostly about the harm because you hear
Yes.
quite commonly that there's all this violence. And I accept that, I'm sure we don't have like accurate statistical reporting of violence in many cases,
Sure.
but he couldn't point to anything. He didn't send me anything. And
Yeah.
he's all in, like helps with the fundraisers and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. There is. I mean, I'll tell you, I've researched it heavily. Gender affirming care is a net harm. There's only 6 studies of 10 years and over. 5 of the 6 show very clear net increase of harm for trans identifying gender dysphoric individuals. Gender dysphoric trans identified individuals face higher rates of hate crime, which is harder to establish because that's again a subjective category speaking to intent, like we were talking about. But
And
they face
that's the
higher
problem.
rates of violence, and they face higher rates of what's called interpersonal violence or IPS or specifically domestic violence, meaning they get beat up by their partners more, which is now that adds a fascinating wrinkle, right? However, we also have that domestic abuse in multiple categories is higher amongst certain cohorts that we don't talk about. But yeah, I mean, they are, listen, they are. Does that mean, like, what does that, the problem is to go, what does that mean? Right? Like, does that mean we have to do
Well,
special
that's
things
what
for them? Or we just stop people from, don't punch trans people in the face for being trans. I'm on that board. Listen, I'm on board with that. Do not do it. Nobody.
it's the same.
Nobody should punch
It's the,
someone in the face for saying they're trans.
well, great. We can all agree on that, hopefully.
Yes.
The difference is, I guess, the progressives, because they've accepted that
Yeah.
trans is is a way of being and a way of life and an identity. And then on top of that, we layer harm. And then so the reaction to that must be legal structures that attempt to prevent harm.
But they already exist. It is illegal to punch a trans person in the face on the street. It is illegal to beat up your trans identifying boyfriend or girlfriend. The legal structures are already in place. No, so this is the fascinating thing. So then they're saying basically the opposite of what they say about crime laws in general. Stop prosecuting crime so much. You know what we need though? We need more government intervention from preventing crime from happening. That's it's what it's a complete contradiction. Like what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Black people are victimized as victims of crime more than any other cohort. And yet the crimes they're victimized for, progressives very frequently openly be like, stop prosecuting those crimes because black people are committing them. Most crime generally is whatever intraracial. So it's black people hurt black people, white people hurt white people, Asian people hurt Asian people, Latino people hurt Latino people. That's just how the world works. It's very sad. So then the idea is we then have to go and basically do moral laws to prosecute only very specific types of crime. It's really like, again, how is that for anyone who's advocating within the movement? How do you not go, why are we doing the opposite in 2 different places? And again, if there's any laws in the books that allow anyone to just like beat up a person if some dude dresses like a lady, what? Yes, yes, we're all on board. Everybody, as far as I know, everyone's on board, right, left, and center. Hey, no, we don't agree with that law. Get rid of that law. But what they're actually trying to do is add like a superiority claim. That's not going to decrease violence against trans identifying people. It's going to increase it for sure. Like, there's no way if you give people special privileges. I'm not sure how anyone knows how this works, but people get super resentful. Like when black people committed violence against white people in white supremacist systems, do you think that had anything to do with the fact that they literally were denied privileges that they watched other people have? Come on. This is like basic understanding of human nature. So this is my question. Who are progressives the worst? And then if they're not the worst, who is even in competition? Because we've got to bring this part 2 in for landing at least. I don't know if we'll answer the question, but we can at least land this episode. Like who to me, white supremacist Christian nationalists are the closest because that's like the similar, that's the progressives on the right, basically. Um, and I just don't think they're the worst because they don't have any power. They have no institutional power. They have little to no power to make laws. They have no influence over pop culture. They're literally biased against in AI, in tech, in all the ways that we consume information. Legally, they can barely get a toehold in uh, schools or whatever. Education is very progressive from kindergarten on up, or atheistic, which again is a minority cohort. They and again, progressives are also like racial supremacists, right? Certain racial categories get benefit, other ones don't. So that's supremacy. And so they want white, they want it for white people. Progressives want it for a shorter list, a longer list than just white people, but they want it for a list of racial categories as well. But there, that's my closest. But I think it's like it's like progressives ran around the lap. They won the thing by like 3 laps or something. But I think, but that at least is my nomination for potentially the silver medalist.
So I'm going to go with no, they're not the worst. And,
Okay.
I would continue to ponder their replacement or who is the worst as a broad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Or even who's the worst
you
throughout
can
human
split that
history.
into two categories because
Yeah.
there's like right now
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
historically, I mean the one that comes to mind sort of most obviously are the Nazis. But I know you would have to toss out abortion as as a measurement of like just flat out
Right.
killing.
Right. Which you can't, right? Because in both cases, it's the same premise. The government said these people aren't persons anymore. They previously had person protection, then
But I'm
they
saying
removed it from them.
progressives do. So
Well,
they
they can't, but they can't. You know what I'm saying?
but they do.
They can't. Well, the same thing. I can hold a lactate in my hand all day long. It doesn't make me a lactate hand. You know what I'm saying? Like they can't. They can't unless they want to violate morals, ethics, and show that they're evil. You know what I'm saying? Because then the Nazis do. The Nazis, what do you mean? They can't do that. They can't say the Jews aren't persons, but they do. And it's the exact same justification, which is they're a leech upon society. They should be obliterated. Having them in our society actually damages our society. They're not really persons. Look at all the shape of their skulls and their noses, all the like bullshit fake science the Nazis brought out. Same thing in the progressives. That's not a human. uh, we scientifically know it's human. It's not alive. We know it's 100% alive. You know what I'm saying? So it's the same. So you can't remove it. You know what I'm saying? Unless the Nazis can keep theirs. So then Jews can't be considered persons, or that can't be considered. The 6 million Jews can't be considered as part of the Nazi harm. I mean, that's fair, right?
Well, I may be stumped for now because I'm a no, but I'm a less hard no, and I don't have a good answer to who's worse.
Who's worse? So wait, so why? But why no then? If there you can't think of anybody who's worse, are you just like, well, but they're I want to hold out. I feel like there is one. It's just I don't have it right now. I haven't slept enough, etc. There's plenty of reasons why I can't think of words. I've stumbled over my words about 17 times in this episode. Um,
It's so absolute. It's literally hard for me to imagine that progressives are the worst.
yeah.
And here
Is
we
there is there
spoke.
anyone? Sorry, is there anyone you then at least to start with? Is there any other social political cohort that you can think of that's worse? Meaning it violates more ethics, more morals, universal principles. Uh, it's semantically manipulative, which is wait, you and I both agree that semantics is like is one of the most basic elements of human regard, right? Because it underpins all thought and communication. Like you can't think without semantics. You can't
It's important. I'm
speak.
more, I don't know, somatic, you know, feeling is important to me, even in influencing truth in a way and how we think about it. We've talked about that a decent amount.
Yeah,
But you know, for the purpose of this particular argument, I think semantics
yeah.
are
Well, because you can't even know what a body is without semantics.
well,
You can't.
exactly.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
how do
yeah.
you, I don't know, regulate or moderate huge populations of people. So you we do that through language.
Yeah,
And
yeah, through language. Well,
famously,
yeah,
so Feldman Barrett pointed out in this book is like we're the only animal.
yes,
Every other animal just feels itself.
yeah,
He's
response.
like we're
Yeah,
the only one who can actually evoke emotions through words. I mean, as far as we know.
yeah, as far as we know.
Said in a different way, said in a more mystical way recently, I heard, we're the only species who forgets who we are,
Hmm.
which poetically I like to think is true. Like, oh, imagine a lion knows who it is. It's not necessarily sitting there, unless it's a picture book. The lions probably aren't sitting around being
Being like, oh,
today.
I can, yeah, yeah. Well, like again, that's the utter lack of capacity for empathy, certainly outside of a species, you know, whereas we have that sort of infinite. So yeah, just casually, who, or maybe it could be even the question, the modified question, just for this episode. I don't know if we'll do another or if this is enough, but like, who can you think of anyone who is worse, meaning they violate more, they they violate more tenets intentionally, systematically, et cetera, that sort of thing.
I mean, my biases certainly lead to totalitarian leaders like Netanyahu, or I mean, I even want to drift towards MAGA, although that's I think less clear.
Yeah.
And I've
How does
yeah,
Netanyahu, like, how would Netanyahu be worse since he's not trying to change what anyone thinks is, right? He's not trying to alter and he's not trying to demand that he's not trying to control anyone how they speak their autonomy. He's engaged in war, which I find a repugnant act in general, and I certainly think in this case the proportionality of the war is. I would absolutely be in agreement with you. I don't remotely understand how this is proportional anymore, or how it has been for well over a year. Um, but yeah, but like systemic, like what does he uniquely offer in terms of, yeah, I guess principle, in terms of harm? Because if he has stated his intention of justified harm, right? Just like, so then if we accept, like, let's say we either have to accept or reject it on the same premises we accept progressives or their intentions or not, whether harm, what they say harm is. So if they say abortion's not harm, killing by killing the unborn isn't harm, then we have to accept, wouldn't we have to also accept Netanyahu's thing that it's like this is all justified killing, premise wise, or we have to use both. You know what I mean? We can get rid of them both too. I think those are both reasonable.
well, I don't. I mean, we've talked about abortion at length,
Yeah,
and I did find that challenging, and I personally decided that that was an exception, and
yeah,
so they are different, which I know is a contradiction. So my bias, I guess, in this moment, I'm realizing is to egregiously visible acts of harm, like degrading. We don't need to argue about indigeneity right now, but just degrading Palestinian as something less than human, which you roll up as an act of war, which is reasonable. But to me, it's like decades. This isn't just this war. I mean, it's not just Netanyahu. I pointed to one person when we're trying to.
sure. Oh, I mean, yeah, they administer. I mean, in general, they're well, both governments have tried to murder each other for since the 30s and 40s. So yeah, it's repugnant. But what I'm saying is, like, that's the legal justification. So the stated intention is this is justified killing, just like abortion is. So then, in terms of, we're going to look at numbers and that which can be visibly shown, amounts, that sort of thing. This is why I've been confused about why progressives specifically are so upset about the war in Gaza. It's like, it doesn't really make that much sense. Unless, wait, do progressives not have the same ethical framework that one's obligation to one's children is actually a superior obligation to one's neighbor? Are they more egalitarian in that sense? Like, is like Netanyahu's obligation to maintain and make sure Palestinians don't die, is that more important than a mother's the moral or ethical impetus on a mother or father to keep their own children alive.
Yeah, it's buried in I don't that's not even how it's viewed. It's buried under uh, autonomy for the mother's body.
Yeah, but this is autonomy for Israeli bodies, right? Everyone, if the Palestinians are reliant upon them, which they have been for years, reliant upon them by a creation of the Israelis, just like consensual sex leads to infants relying on the mother to survive. The Israelis have created a situation where the Palestinians sort of require their compliance in order for aid to get through, in order to survive. And they're withdrawing that. And then they're also causing active harm. So it's the exact same paradigm, except one is for one's own child and one is for one's, in this case, it's disgusting to call a child your enemy. But in war, when you're part of a tribe, this is the terrible thing about being part of a tribe, folks. When your tribe goes to war, you're at war whether you like it or not, and it's repugnant. It's disgusting. Uh, I, I I disavow war as a general solution method, um, but it's the same principle. So then I was like, oh, but maybe I don't understand because I haven't explored this well enough. But I was like, in progressivism, did they consider protection of your neighbor more important than protection of your child, or equally? In which case, the violation of a mother killing their own mother or father killing their own child is a lesser like a lesser harm. It's more likely to be viewed like a euthanasia than if someone who's like your neighbor or and only partially and all most of the Jews and Palestinians are genetically related to one another also, so that factors in a familial element.
Well, one thing that makes me think of is, yeah, there's maybe like an excitement, or I think this is quite true of the progressive movement, because I've been in a number of marches. We were
Yeah,
involved with George Floyd, et cetera. So there's this sense of like let's get out in the streets, let's be loud, let's fight back, et cetera.
yeah,
And that just flat out kind of is an exciting thing to be a part of. And I
yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah,
many people question the motivation of that. When I'm in Chicago, you don't have to walk very far in the city to find somebody sleeping on the street, doesn't have enough to eat, etc.
yeah,
So I'm not trying to
yeah,
evade what you're saying, but it's even more potentially more broad than that, which is like this tendency to, yeah, want to go march, for Palestinian rights. We might be like almost stepping over. I guarantee you, some of those marches have
oh,
literally like
oh, for sure.
were stepped over, people who didn't have enough to eat or were.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and listen, I've been part of marches to end abortion. And it's super fun to go like, oh my gosh, maybe this will do something. No, it doesn't tend to, of course, as you know from your own activism. It is often a vain exercise as far as impact goes. But the intent can be clarifying and I think helpful. And you hope it's honestly, in some ways, you hope it's helpful generationally. You're like, if this can start a movement, and in 4 generations from now, things will be different. I mean, I feel like that's the constant hope of most activism. But I was like, just since Netanyahu came up as an example, or the sort of Israeli government, that at least there you do have a war against a group or a country, if you're going to call them that. They're not actually a nation, but whatever. For the purposes of this, we can call them that. A group of people who are governed by people whose stated intention is to kill all Jews with the help of sentient rocks and trees. We know that specifically. And so there you do have a thing where I find it's confounded by difficulty, meaning they have this plausible deniability, meaning this is literally the people who have been helping and the people who have been wanting to kill us with the help of sentient rocks and trees. Whereas if progressives are going to apply that same principle of like non-malfeasance or non-harm, there's no explicit threat to even justify the harm that they don't march against. Or actually, when people march against it, progressives are like, you hate women, right? Which is pretty much as I think as stupid as saying stop killing Palestinians and you're like you hate Jews. It doesn't make a lick of sense. You don't get to say that. If someone says they're anti-Zionist, you can say that's anti-Semitic because both the Muslim and the Jewish claim on the land is Zionistic specifically. So from that, you could say it. But if someone's just marching and saying, please stop bombing Gaza, you couldn't say, well, you just want to control Jews. And people say it. Plenty of people say it. And progressives say the same thing for any anti-abortion march. You're just trying to control women. You hate women. But you've got this is listen, Gaza's been the best thing for the abortion movement, I think, in history. Because people keep highlighting 14,000 children have been killed, and babies in preemie units, and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, hold on a second. What are you complaining about that for? Like a progressive doesn't get to complain about people being killed by the government who decides it's a legal killing because you support legal killing that kills around 1 million people a year in your own country. That in 50 years has killed more human beings than all wars throughout all history over the span of known, whatever, thousands of years, 4,000 years. So in some ways, it's great. I mean, in some ways, it's good that you brought it up because just like with the Nazis, you can't disinclude one set just because this government says it's okay, and then say, well, that government says it's okay there, but they were wrong, right? You have to apply the principle universally. And Palestine, Gaza specifically, is the best example of it because they were like, oh no, they're killing people by not letting aid in, which means the Palestinians are reliant upon the Israelis in order to continue to survive, just like an unborn person is reliant on their parent in order to continue to survive. So it's the same paradigm. The only thing is the different ethical obligations of whether you have the same thing for your enemy or neighbor. Listen, Christianity says you have to love your enemy. So I'm not saying it's an untenable premise. I would just say traditionally, I think most people are like taking care of your children is more important than taking care of like the homeless guy outside. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's probably another good episode. But then it does make me wonder, maybe is that another non-egalitarian application of universal principle? Or can we just tentatively call those hypocrisies? Or is that unfair? And then we can land the plane.
I mean, it all boils down. I think any progressive would say yes, it's absolutely mandatory to take care of your born out of the womb child. That's the dividing line.
Got it. Got it. So then they have to allow any other exceptions that anyone places on someone else's humanity. Meaning you have to take care of white people or you have to take care of Jews. And even if you have to kill every Palestinian to make sure not one Jew doesn't die, that's what we have to do. You can't, you know what I'm saying? You can't say one is more legitimate than the other. If you're going to allow exceptions, you have to allow at least one exception, right, for every group. Or are you saying you're the only, or a progressive saying they're the only group that can make an exception?
I They might be saying that in a lot of categories.
Right. Now, wouldn't that be evil? Because it's evil when everybody else does it. So why would they be the only group in history that's allowed to make that exception and not be considered evil?
And that is the question we will continue to ponder.
Okay, great.
I assume your answer is
As far as I can tell, yeah, progressives are the worst intentionally and openly. In terms of scale, if you wanted to zoom out to scale for all time, I think they still might take the cake. Specifically, if we're gonna, I disallow any exceptions for denial of personhood. If you kill a black person, even if they're not legally a person, that's a death. If you kill a Jew, even if they're not legally a Jew, legally a person, that is still killing a Jew. It does not matter what you say someone else is. Even same thing, wars. I count harm in wars, even responsive wars. When the US went to war against Japan, who attacked us first, all of that was killing people. And that is included in the death toll of the United States bloodshed. Justified or unjustified, I don't care. It counts to me in the total scale. So if you don't allow exceptions where black people can be pulled out or Jews can be pulled out, or for a lot of indigenous cultures, anyone from another tribe is not considered the same. Any extra tribal. So as long as you pull out exceptions, then I think they have a good case for the worst stated intentionally system also in human history. But hey, maybe we can do another episode with like another hardcore progressive who might hear this episode and be like, "No, hold on a second, I've got it."
Well,
I'm always
you
open.
you've made a good case. If my job was to defend the progressives, I have failed, and that's okay.
No, no, no. I always like it. I like it better when we agree.
Maybe, but yeah, maybe we can bring on our very first guest ever.
Woo! Until then, I enjoy being your guest, Andy Swindler.
And yours, Brendan McNamara.
All right, I love you, man.
Love you. Bye.